Welcome, everybody. Today, we are going to be discussing location-based salaries for remote workers. So whether or not remote workers should be compensated based on where they live. So this is quite the debatable topic. My name is Kate Smith. I am a remote career coach and founder at the Remote Nomad. I'm going to be moderating today's event. Joining the panel today, we have Kevin Kirkpatrick, who is the CEO of We Work Remotely. We have Max Tremaine, the co-founder and CEO of Sherpa. We have Staszek Kolarzowski, who is the co-founder at Pilot. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining the panel today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started, I just want to do a quick little shout out to We Work Remotely and thank them for putting this together. A lot goes into putting together this virtual job fair. A lot of work goes into it. So if you're watching this video, send some love to We Work Remotely. And I just want to thank the team for putting this together. So let's just dive right into it today and get started with, should a company pay you depending on where you live? Why or why not?
I'll jump in and kick it off. Yeah, I think the debate is, obviously it's a bit heated and it's ongoing, and I feel like we're really kind of early stages in figuring this out. I'm super interested to hear kind of everyone's thoughts. I guess from what we've seen and what we've kind of heard through other conversations is there's a handful of approaches. The first being kind of like location based. And then what's kind of emerged over time has been what people have kind of called, maybe value-based or something similar to that, which is more about paying what the market does versus, and really what you bring to the company versus where you live specifically. And then there's kind of, I think about as like net new territory of hybrid models that kind of come from that. And I think that's the almost more interesting space to get into, is to kind of break out of this binary where it's either location-based or not. And I'll share my thoughts maybe further down the conversation, but I think that's where, at least from what we see, that's where the conversation starts, and it gets more interesting as you venture into that new territory. So I'm really curious to hear, Max and Staszek, what you guys have seen or heard from your side, or what you guys are implementing, your own companies.
Yeah, I can take that away first. And yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to chat about this stuff. So when we first went fully remote, it was after like a couple of weeks of Toronto's COVID lockdowns. We said it's probably not going to be 2 to 3 weeks. It's one of the few predictions that seemed actually to pan out. And the one thing that stuck out to us was that if we're going fully remote, might as well not be kind of tied down to Toronto. And we looked out and said a couple of things. One was are there regions that are going to be specifically beneficial to us? We found was there were amazing people kind of everywhere that we looked. And the other piece was, we had already modeled out salaries for Toronto. We looked at that and said, where can we be very competitive with these comparables? So that has worked out well for us in a few different ways, like speed to hire has been really good for us. We're in 7 countries now, or we have people in 7 countries now, rather. It's made us really quick, where we're able to say yeah, wow, we have a really competitive comparable in this market. I found someone who's amazing in this market. Let's hire them. I think, over time, our how we do salaries is probably going to gain some nuance, especially in more expensive markets where we do have to operate. But I think, the having one kind of, call it like an anchor or comparable that you're able to look out in the marketplace and see where you're going to be competitive in that anchor, I think it's served us really well. It was kind of the lazy way to go, and it ended up being really good.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen it recently, quite often. So the pragmatic approach, how I sometimes call it, is good way to do this. I personally don't have I have some preference for one of the models, but after many years working remotely, because I've been working remotely since 2009, and I think I've seen all the possible approaches. One thing I can say is there's no one there's fair for everyone. So every single model, whatever you choose, is unfair to someone. And I have a past when I work with a lot of people Eastern Europe and Latin America, when the rates tend to be lower. If you ask anyone from those locations what should be the model, everyone's yeah, like it should be like location independent, because that's the only fair model, right? Like we give company the same value, we should be compensated the same. Anything different is like unfair. So that's what's my experience for like many years. But once we started working with a lot of people in the United States, I heard completely different argument, which is, you know, like, hey, why I'm working the same as like we're doing the same job as like person other part of the world, and I have trouble to like pay rent, and the person from other countries like buying the second apartment or something like this. How does this fair to the company? So like I would say it's like very depends. There's like I never seen any model that's like fair to everyone. So I think like one of the decisions like which unfairness you're okay with and in which way you want to you would like to lean on. So that's my like general framework how to think about this, the whole approach.
Awesome. And Kevin, you had mentioned about a hybrid model. Do you want to explain that a bit more?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've seen some companies do this more recently where they take the value-based model and then essentially, as you could think about, subtract geography. So they use that as a variable to kind of insert around the value-based model. So that they do have kind of like Max was saying, they do kind of, when they model it out, they have a baseline that gives them, you know, the ability to go possibly move quickly, hire wherever they need to, and they know that they're generally within the range that they need to be in. And so they're not swinging dramatically and getting also kind of then into the situation like Staszek said, where it's like, you know, on one side, someone might be, you know, just incredibly wealthy very quickly, or on the other side, someone might still be struggling to make rent and that salary is the same. And so it kind of adjusts for it. And I know that there are companies doing that now. And I think even beyond that, there's a potential model that is being discussed kind of at a very early stage, which is really around, it kind of goes between those two models a little bit, and it's more regional based. So where you can look by region, not by city specifically. So you get a little bit more flexibility than just like, you know, it's like, for example, I live outside of the Seattle area in Washington. And so my cost of living is definitely lower than when I lived downtown Seattle a year and a half ago. But that doesn't mean that my cost of living has gone, you know, has been cut in half or something to that effect. So it's, you know, being cognizant of that you're still within a, you know, a high cost of living area potentially, but not quite to the same degree. And so you don't need to make such dramatic swings one direction or the other. And I think that's where people are kind of, you know, like Max and Staszek said, like there's no perfect model, but I think you have to kind of define one that fits your company and your employees, because some are more geographically distributed than others. And so those swings can be more dramatic, and some might be just, you know, for example, might just be in the US or might be just across a couple states for you know, example. So that puts you in a completely different category.
Yes, we've been using that hybrid model or something similar for like almost 6 years right now. So maybe I can just give you an example how it works at like our company, but not every hybrid is the same, by the way. So the way we set it up is like we have 3 baskets of locations. So there's like US high cost city like San Francisco or New York. Then like the second market would be US and Western Europe. So like salaries, like in this basket, they competitive like most of the cities in the United States and most of the cities in Western Europe, but they're not competitive in San Francisco and New York. And then there's like a third basket, which is like rates that will be competitive in like Eastern Europe, South America, and those countries. What's really important for us, like 2 people doing the same job should always earn the same amount of money no matter the location. So we don't assign people to like our baskets, it's more like we assign roles. So for example, the whole engineering, like no matter if it's like software, like senior, junior, mid engineer, they all match to like the mid-level basket, I would say, like the US one, which means that like if you want to hire engineers, we competitive like Western Europe, we competitive in Eastern Europe and like Latin America by extension, like very competitive, I would say, but we're not competitive in San Francisco. But let's say for like support roles, right? For like customer support, like for the whole department, like we match the salaries for that third location because there's like like we don't have trouble to like find people with those salaries like for those roles, right? But for sales team, for example, we had some trouble to find people with like the mid basket. So like every salesperson is like matched to the highest basket. It is. I like this model because like fair for like people, because two people doing the same job earn the same money, so that's fair. But it's also unfair because the problem is like you have like those differences between departments, right? So, like the support department has like lower salaries than like the sales, for example. So that's like the unfairness. One change that we did when we grown the company, like we just removed like the lower lower end. So like the idea is like we don't want to have like too many people in a company where like one person is earning like 20 times more like this the second person. So the idea was like let's just remove like the third basket. So now we have two. And maybe at one day, like we will be able to like afford like moving everyone to San Francisco Salaries. That would be great. But this hybrid one was like very helpful when we couldn't do this for everyone and still wanted to be somehow location independent.
Yeah, and I'll play off of one thing that Staszek said, which is, being able to choose your trade-offs. Like for us, one thing that we thought about was how moving to having one set of comparables would be aligned with our culture and vision. For us, we want to enable people to travel. It's the core of the business. So when we looked at, what people were thinking of when we ran this by them, it was like, yeah, I would move. I would use geo arbitrage to its fullest. We actually did have a lot of people move after we changed to doing this, because people had been holding off moving because they weren't sure how it was going to affect their comp and stuff like that. And it's been hugely positive for our culture and alignment with our vision. So I think that's something you definitely have to think about as well. And yeah, like just from the perspective of like a growth stage startup, you're going to make the independent decisions for hires no matter what. So you hit those places where it's like, oh, we need to hire this person, and they're here. The comps are way far off. It's like, you're going to do that no matter what to a certain extent. So I think having some kind of fuzzy lines is going to be expected as well.
Interesting. So I've got two questions coming up here. You mentioned culture. We've mentioned that a few times and the impact on employees. So I'd be curious to hear everyone's take on the impact that it does have in terms of culture and speed to hire. And also after that, I'd like to dive into digital nomads. So how this can be addressed when you have an employee that is earning a salary, but they're hopping locations. So they're not necessarily in one location. So maybe we'll start with culture first and the impact that has on the company culture.
I guess I preface this, so I can go off on it. Yeah, sure. For us, it's had a really exciting effect on our culture. When we first went remote, we were still all in Toronto. It felt kind of weird, and then we started hiring people all over the world, and it really kind of kicked in exactly what going remote was going to do for us. It's also created this, I never like the kind of family metaphors for businesses, but you have people that you're connected with all around the world. It feels very interesting. It's a very positive experience. I would say, thoughtfully building it. We were lucky in that we had it built into our vision and culture, that we were very pro international travel. I think being thoughtful, if that's not a kind of core piece of your business, about how that plays in, it can create a really, exciting situation for the people who work at the company. Also enabling people to travel, I'd say. Just sorry to keep going, but off of one point you just made previously, enabling people to travel once you've said that we're going to have these even salary comps, I think is something that's hugely exciting for people as well, and has a positive effect on culture.
Max, do you have any like programs or incentive to help people travel? Like, is it like that part of the culture to give like, I don't know, like some kind of programs, like everyone travels once a year and there's like stipend, like, do you have any ideas like this?
Yeah, we do. We're starting with a program like this. We have a quarterly all hands, and we're now rotating the cities for those. So that's one big piece. The other big piece that we did is we took, set up a deal with an immigration lawyer who had a really good international network, so that we could help people out to figure out the paperwork. That's been super helpful because a lot of people they'll have this kind of nascent idea in their head that like, oh yeah, I might want to go live in Mexico, but I have no idea, what I might need to go do that. If you have a resource quick to hand for stuff like that, it's very helpful.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the impact on, I don't think like the comp philosophy for location-based salaries are not like had much impact on the culture, to be honest. I think what had a much bigger impact is like the whole approach to compensation that we have. So I would say a lot of things is like super transparent at Pilot, I would say. So people know how the comp is calculated. Like the whole philosophy of the compensation is like open. We had like discussions what like was built with the whole team. The hybrid model that I discussed, like that was created together with the team. So like we worked on this like many years ago. I think that has like the openness to like discuss the compensation in a company and like to discuss like how it's calculated, how it's approached. I think that had like a little bit more bigger impact on the culture than like just a decision about being this local or not. Because again, like I don't think there's like a good decision if this should be location based or not. But I think what people appreciate and has impact on culture is like, can you have like discussion like which one should be, like I think that's more important than like actually like making a decision. As long as I think everyone understands why you made this decision and why it works this way, then like I think this should be fine.
Yeah, just to add to what both of them have called out perfectly, I think there are a lot of benefits, and I think intentionality, kind of like you were saying there, Max, is so critical. And I think, and then also, that typically leads, especially in these organizations, there's so many that are going into transparency, and those two factors are really, really critical. And I think that when we really look at, kind of like you were saying, Staszek, it's like, it does impact the culture, but really at the core, it really impacts the individual, which then impacts the culture, right? And so when individuals feel like they're supported, they understand how decisions are made, how things are done, they feel more empowered to engage, to participate, to feel like they can, be heard within the company. And I think that has such a big impact that compensation, while such an important thing, almost becomes kind of like secondary, because they know that they're going to be taken care of. They know that that there's trust in the organization, which again, those are all much bigger components that are often harder to find. And I think those end up coming from this process, which is a great thing that we're, all just kind of unearthing this now, and it's kind of forcing it to the forefront in such a positive way.
Okay, the other thing that you mentioned that I just wanted to highlight was speed to hire, which I mentioned previously. And I think, if you don't really think about it, it can just seem like, yeah, it'll be quicker to hire. We only have one comp, but like having to redo salary comps every time you open a new region or a new city, having to redo comps every time someone moves, it really does affect a lot of different things. And if every manager on your team has one salary comp table that they can look at, it's just so much more straightforward, especially when you give them that plus like a rough view of the marketplace for hiring in every region. Becomes very clear quickly, where your time is going to be best spent. And it also enables you to look at, again, going back to culture, like where are the really amazing hubs for all the different stuff that you're focusing on. Like, after we went to the one comp for any locale, we ended up hiring a couple of design people in Brazil, where they had this amazing culture for design and digital. So yeah, it's that piece I think is really worth staying to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like keeping is the comp simple, like removes like so many headaches. then we had a different approach like many years ago. I think we've been inspired by Buffer and like the whole like I don't know if you know like the Buffer like formula, and we really I personally really like this idea. Not only because I love spreadsheets and like complex stuff, but like I really like the idea. But exactly like Max said, like that was like so complex to just calculate every like salary that like like at some point we just get rid of this and have something simple right now.
Awesome. And I'm sure the employees also appreciate that. It just makes it more simple and easy to understand as well. So now let's look at digital nomads, because remote work is enabling a lot of people to work from anywhere in the world. So how does that play a role or factor in how they get compensated? I'd love to hear your takes on that.
Yeah, I think like at least for us, like if it's like not location based and like it's super simple, right? Like they can move and that you don't have to do anything. So we have an example of like one person from our team. They just moved from States to Mexico, and like nothing changed, right? I mean, we have to change some paperwork and like take care of like this side, but this is what our company does. So like that was actually quite easy for us. But yeah, like that's if you have like location dependent model, then like it's very easy to work with digital nomads. There is like some compliance issue, I would say. So I don't know, like if you don't know that someone moved to the country to the different country, which sometimes happen, then you may have some problems because maybe you should like pay taxes in different country or something. But it's not like a location dependent salaries problem. It's like HR problem, I would say.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I think this is where the hybrid models come into play so well, right? Is that when you have like the models we're talking about here, where you have a baseline value-based approach, then essentially you've already likely met the baseline need, so that as people move around, whether that's monthly, 6 month, quarterly, whatever that looks like for them, so you're still kind of maintaining a necessary baseline. And then at some point, at least for in my experience having done this, if at some point that person decides to stop being a nomad and pick a location and say, hey, I'm going to live here for the foreseeable future, then again, you don't have to go reset things. It fits the model, and then you can maybe make a minor adjustment based on that location, kind of plus or minus, usually plus. And it's not so much back and forth. It's more the logistics around compliance and everything else that comes with that, where you do get into, that can be a lot more of a headache, which is, why great companies like yours exist.
Yeah, and I think for digital nomadism, like the salary comp is not the difficult part. I think it's generally the benefits. How would you be able to comp benefits if someone is going to be, no fixed address for a period of time? And again, like this is why, right now is like a whole new world of opportunity for immigration lawyers, figuring all that stuff out. Yeah, we had one person who's traveling around long period of time. Likewise, went to Mexico, just so open. Why wouldn't you? And yeah, like, it came to light through talking to our lawyer that, if they were going to be gone for a longer period of time, they were going to lose their public health benefits in Ontario. So where Toronto is located. So yeah, it's just something you have to be really mindful of, like how this affects benefits. Even when someone's immigrating, like the total comp, making sure your options are going to work everywhere, all that different stuff.
And do you think that's what do you feel is the biggest factor when we look at, we've talked about getting compensated essentially based on value so far with a little bit of hybrid. Do you think a big reason why a lot of companies aren't fully on board is because of the compliance and figuring that all out? Do you feel like where do you feel this area of resistance is when some employers are stuck on, no, I'm going to pay you based on location?
I'll just jump in with a hopefully candid and honest answer there. I think a lot of companies see it as an opportunity to cut costs, candidly. I think that's the unfortunate downside, is that a lot of people move to tech hubs or something, to larger urban areas to get these jobs, and then remote work sort of releases that requirement. People move away, employers see it as an opportunity to say, okay, I can cut 30% of my costs there. Great, I'll do that. And now we're kind of off in that zone. And I think, you know, a lot of companies who have tried that have found it to be, in the short run, it kind of works for them. But I think in the long run, it ultimately ends up at the same place where, you know, the value is still the value. And I think the employees, you know that now. And that's why so much over the last 2 years or so, we've seen, you know, what's coined as like the great resignation, is because people are saying, I shouldn't necessarily have to like forego, you know, getting compensated well for the same work just because I've moved an hour, 10 hours, whatever it is, away from this location. And I think that's what started it, but I don't think that will be what, you know, where it ends, honestly. I think that was just the initial reaction to what seemed like it was on the table.
And
So, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, there's a side of companies that like it's about cutting costs, but also like how many companies can afford to like, you know, have San Francisco salaries for everyone. So sometimes it's not even like they want to cut the cost, it's just they cannot afford to like have everyone on like those kind of salaries. So that's another reason I sometimes see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unfair to say that there are definitely compliance hurdles to jump through for going remote. But yeah, I mean, say if you were based in the Bay Area and you wanted to become more open, you could be fully open in the United States and still take advantage of everything that we've talked about. You're going to pay a lot less to hire people in Missoula and wherever off the beaten trail to work for the company, enable people to move around. Beautiful country full of cool stuff to see and travel through. So, you know, you could achieve a lot of this without taking on too much regulatory headache. And the regulatory headache that is there is you can overcome it. And, you know, what you save in terms of like physical space moving to this kind of model, you know, you're not going to pay more for that legal support.
Yeah, but I think like the fairness also has something to do with this. And maybe short story, like one. I was in like one of the meetings. It was like different company, but basically the developers they had the same salaries in different locations. They talked to each other, and there's like one person, and I think they've been based in Romania, I think, and they've been telling how they bought this 9-apartment complex and they're going to rent this, and like they building another one. And then you have like on the same call, you have like people in the United States, and they like, you know, I want to buy a new PlayStation or something, and I can afford rent. So I get why like sometimes people can like feel unfair, like, you know, if you're doing the same job and like someone is building like, you know, like complex apartments. That's probably like is another reason sometimes.
So let's chat about then how all of this is going to impact the future of work. And this kind of relates to remote work as well, in terms of the impact of, does it level the playing field for people that are in developing countries? Is it going to hurt those that are in developing countries? Like how's this going to impact this? How remote employees are compensated, whether it's based on location or not? How is that going to impact literally the future of work?
Can I take this one? Yeah, so something that especially for engineering, what I already see is like if engineer has an access to like remote opportunities, they no longer like the local market in terms of like salaries. So this is what I see, like any remote engineer, like they have access to almost like, you know, like US based salaries, like San Francisco based, sometimes even like to those. So definitely what I've seen like recent years, like there is like a lot of like there's like more money going to like, for example, engineers in like countries outside of US. So that's definitely happening, and it's only going to happen like, you know, again. So which has a lot of advantages, but like also has some advantages for like local markets. So I'm, for example, living in Poland right now, and I have some friends who have like local companies, like, you know, local companies in Poland, they want to compete in like Polish markets, and they just can't afford engineers right now because almost everyone is working remotely, and there's like a lot of like US-based companies that just can offer higher salary. So there's definitely some problems, but at the end of the day, I think there's like more benefits for everyone to have access to more opportunities.
Yeah, I think that in terms of, yeah, I think you're right in terms of, kind of lifting the floor there a little bit in terms, across different geographies. I also think what we'll see more of, kind of to your point about, local companies, is essentially that will be harder, whether they're tech or not. It will be actually harder to find talent because now it's really that opens up the market more. So therefore, it becomes really difficult if you aren't competing in kind of this more global market, right? So if you have maybe more of like kind of a brick and mortar opportunity, like actually you're going to have, because more workers can go remote in their work, it's going to be harder to find more local work. And I think that's actually going to be the bigger shift in kind of the future work scope, is that so much of the localized economies, it's going to be harder to figure out how do you draw money there? How do you continue to fuel those and grow those? And I think you're seeing that even already, with people leaving some of the bigger cities over the last few years in this transition. You're seeing smaller, towns kind of blossom. Like, I know Max mentioned like Missoula, for example, like probably growing is my guess. Or, there are all these like second kind of third tier cities that are growing pretty rapidly because of the cost of living, because of what they offer. But the challenge is, do you get stuck in kind of the middle space of not having enough resources locally to be able to continue to grow that local economy? I think that's going to be the bigger question that needs to be solved along the way.
Yeah, I think the two major shifts that have been highlighted here are absolutely true. One we saw in Toronto last year across the board for tech roles, we saw, a salary comp increase. I think the average is probably 30-40%. It was a huge yearly jump. And it was specifically because more people, specifically in the Bay Area, were hiring people in Toronto, engineers specifically. So that's happened. The other piece, which I've mentioned for my team, has happened as well. People, get their comp, they look around them and say like, hey, I don't travel into the office every day. Why do I live in 700 square feet when I could have a couple thousand square feet out in the suburbs? And that's like the most kind of first natural move. The next kind of interesting piece, it's like, do people kind of have a natural inclination to move even further than that? And is there a kind of general, broader movement? Human history has been marked by major migratory trends. Maybe we're on the cusp of another one right now. That'd be super cool. I don't know if that's going to happen, but the first two things have definitely happened, certainly.
Now, my final question, something to consider that I'm curious to get your take on. So say somebody's getting paid based on their location. They go to college in America, they pay the tuition to go to college in America, but they're living somewhere else with a low cost of living. What becomes fair in that situation?
Just to clarify, are you thinking fair as in still within the US?
So say somebody is American, they invest in the education there, they pay for that, and they decide, okay, I'm going to live abroad in a different country with a really low cost of living. Does that get factored into the mix?
I was going to say, I'll throw in my 2 cents there. I still think this is where the value-based model is critical. I think there has to be, again, sort of a floor or range, a band, to which if let's say you've gone to be an engineer, let's say hypothetically, just because that was top of mind, you should still get paid comparably. Now, does that mean that maybe, you get all of the benefits or all of the upsides? Not necessarily. I think that's where a lot of the questions that Max brought up in terms of how do we handle that. I think you may have to forego some of those, but I do think compensation should be kind of leveled out, sort of in that, I think the canonical example, which is, kind of predates even early remote conversations about this, is Dan Price in Seattle with his company, where he raised the, minimum salary to, I think, 70 or 75,000. And, it didn't matter what job you were doing. that was the salary that you started with. And obviously the upside was much, much higher, but that was where you start. I think we're going to see more models that look kind of like that.
Yeah, like I guess it depends what kind of salary comps you're starting with, what they are. Like for us, using a Toronto salary comparable as our base to start from, we weren't uncompetitive in North American markets, especially in like the Northeast and Midwest. New York, not as a part of that, but yeah, I think, depending on where you want to hire, you're going to have to think about that for sure. And if you want to be able to hire everywhere, you're probably not going to be able to just stick with one. And you will have to think the way I've described, where it's like, what markets can I be more competitive in? But yeah, I guess what I take away from your question is to ask, like, an 18-year-old that's listening, it's like, why would you pay American tuition when you can kind of go anywhere and world's going to be your oyster? So yeah, I think that's probably going to have some implications down the road too.
That may be a whole nother discussion on its own, whether the degrees are critical or necessary, or if it's just, do you have the value? Can you do the skill? Is that more important than having a piece of paper and degree? But that would probably be a whole other panel discussion.
I think the resounding answer to that is yes.
Amazing. Okay, so before we wrap up today, is there anything else, any final thoughts when it comes to, we talked a lot about hybrid, any final thoughts when it comes to location-based salaries for remote employees, hybrid model, any final thoughts on salaries?
I'll just throw one note in there that I think everyone touched on in some capacity today, which is we're still, even though we've kind of locked some things down and we're learning, we're very much in the middle of that process. And this is still kind of a white space for us to figure out. And I actually think that that's the really exciting point, is that we're no longer locked into the same models and ideas that we've had for, a century effectively. I think this is a really good opportunity for each company to start being creative. Like Staszek, you brought up Buffer, right? Like Buffer was one of the first to lay some of this out early, 10 years ago. And since then, people have been learning and iterating and trying different things. And I think the more that as a community, we can share what we're learning, share what's working, share what's not working, and start to benefit from each other, I think we'll really accelerate a lot of this growth that we're, working through it, and, simplify a lot of the complexity along the way.
I was maybe just say one thing. So salary is only one part of problem, and I would say it's the easier one. What's much harder is like benefits part, especially if people in different countries, when countries have completely different philosophy on like benefits. So for example, what should be the company policy for parental leave if you have people in Europe where it's like 1 year, in like Norway this is like 18 months, in United States like if you offer like 8 weeks, like you consider a good company. So how you approach this, how you approach PTO, how you approach like sick leaves, how you approach like different tax rates, that's much more complex. And I think like that's something that like I think there'll be more discussion about this, because I think for salaries we have like some models, as like Kevin mentioned, and we did this work for like less than years when we iterated for something. I don't think we did this for benefits. So like I can still imagine there will be like a lot of different points of view and options for like the benefits. But for me personally, there's like much harder problem than like salaries right now.
Yeah, I would say like initially I advocated for, having one set of salary comparables is like the easy way to do it. I would adjust that a little bit and say like, you have to think about where you want to be spending your effort when you're thinking about hiring people. And if you think about a hire as like, there are 3 levers that you can pull. One is the salary comparable, one is the profile for the hire, and one is the location. Like if you say like, if you try to pick all 3, you're never going to be able to find the exact right person. If you take location out of it, you can be really thoughtful about what your salary comparables should be and what your profile should be. And then you'll have a whole world to hire from. And like I said, you can find markets where you're going to be very competitive. So yeah, it's not just the easy way to do it. You can't just turn it on, leave it there. But it's like, think about the things that you want to be really thoughtful about and do those.
Amazing. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on and sharing your insight. It's going to be really exciting to see how this shifts and evolves and changes things in the next 5 to 10 years. And I appreciate you sharing all of your insights and coming on today. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.